Hello, everybody. Welcome into another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Thursday, November 14th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We got to start talking about that big game going on in Athens, Georgia this upcoming weekend. Tennessee has a chance to knock Georgia out of the CFP race. Georgia just trying to stay alive and see if they can get one of those at-large bids. Then we'll get to the big noon controversy. A lot of Big Ten fans, specifically Penn State and Ohio State fans, that are none too happy with Fox and their current media deal, and I'll get into that and why some of their anger might be a little bit misguided. Then we'll get into some of the picks and previews. I want to get into Oregon, Wisconsin, as well as South Carolina, Missouri, two huge games that could be a little bit sketchy, especially for Oregon and Missouri, two teams that very much want to be in that CFP race. Then we'll get to the Big 12. I want to get to Utah at Colorado, going to be a really interesting game over there in Boulder. And then we'll get to Arizona State, Kansas State, a winner leaves town type of game. Whoever loses it is fully out of the race for the Big 12. Whoever wins it is still very much in the race, especially if Colorado were to lose to Utah. And then we'll finish it off. We'll do a little bit of a whip around. We'll get to all the top 25 games, or at least a vast majority of them, and definitely one of them that's really, really huge in the Group of 5 race for the CFP. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat. At the bottom of the chat, you'll see a little $sign. Add any question, comment you'd like there. It'll pop up on the screen, and we can have a fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible. Really, really fun time of the year, so any questions you have, definitely use that super chat, and we can definitely have a little bit of a conversation here. Also, GSMCPodcast.net, still up and running, does the exact same thing. So either one of those, please utilize that, and we can have a fun back and forth. But let's get into this huge game that's going on in Athens, Georgia this upcoming weekend. It is Tennessee, it is Georgia, and it is a game that is as big as really anyone in that rivalry. Even when you go back to 2022, it was a huge game, no doubt about it, but there were still some hurdles for those teams to get over after that game. So definitely one of those that has the feeling of kind of a playoff game. This is something that we've gotten over the last little bit where it is outright an elimination game for Georgia. If they lose, I think it's nearly impossible for them to get into the CFP. There's been some kicking around of the idea of a 3-loss SEC team getting in. The only way that happens to me is if it's Bama and it's in the SEC title game. That would be the only way that I could see a 3-loss team, and that would be a 10-3 team, not a 9-3 team. So I think too much stuff would have to happen for Georgia to get in. Understand it's a really hard schedule, but at the end of the day, I think 3 losses would likely do them in. But they are favored in this game by 10.5 points, over-under set at 48.5. And for Tennessee, this is really about changing your program. As crazy as that sounds, it's kind of the Penn State situation in a lot of different ways, where they've been able to beat a lot of the teams below them in the last couple of years. They've been able to even get over Bama 2 out of the last 3 years, which has been huge for that program moving forward. They just haven't quite gotten UGA. They just haven't quite gotten that team in red and black, and it's going to be really interesting to see, can they get this win, and then what happens after that? It could be kind of a changing of the guard of sorts in the SEC, where you have a Tennessee team that has been rising over the last couple of years, and now they're just waiting for that one big spark plug, that one thing to say, we're on the same level, we might be better than some of the other teams at the top of the SEC, and Saturday would be the time to do it. But for the CFP, it's really straightforward. If Tennessee was able to win this one, it'd be really straightforward pretty much the rest of the way. Barring some crazy upset or anything like that, it would be the winner of Texas A&M facing off against Tennessee in Atlanta. Bar none, that would be the way it was, unless Tennessee were to lose to Vanderbilt or Texas were to lose to Arkansas or Kentucky or something crazy were to happen. That would be the matchup that you would get. So that would make things a little bit easier, at least on the noggin, to make sure that we know what's going to happen in the SEC the rest of the way. But at the end of the day, Georgia has plenty to play for here. Obviously a game that could knock them out of the entire race. Obviously a game that they kind of have their backs up against the wall, and it's one of those places that you feel like Georgia might be a really live dog. It was kind of that same feeling you got going into that Texas game, kind of getting it here, but we'll get into that here in a second. But getting into the game, I think it's a really interesting matchup. You got Carson Beck on one side, has been really struggling lately, and is not really showing signs of turning a corner. If he's going to turn one, it's going to have to be on Saturday, and if it's not, they're going to be in a lot of trouble. And frankly, it's going to be pretty hard to turn that corner against this defense. But the reality is, he's going to have to make some plays in this one. Against this good of a run defense, he's going to have to be the guy that's going to make a lot of these plays. And he's come up short a couple of different times. And the quarterback situation for Tennessee is getting more complicated as the week goes on. Chris Felico reported yesterday that Nico was very unlikely to go. Now others have said there's no decision made. Even others have said he should be ready to go. So I don't really know what's going to happen there. Gaston Moore is a capable quarterback. If it was in Neyland Stadium, I'd feel a lot better about Nico not playing. It being in Sanford makes me a little bit nervous about this kid. If he goes out there, if Gaston Moore is the guy that's leading them the entire way, that place is going to be on fire, and I can't imagine he's not going to struggle just a little bit with that. So definitely something to watch there. It's going to be a little bit of a battle for him to deal with that. And then despite UGA's struggles, the defense has played really good football. There's never really been a game where they've been absolutely blown out of the water defensively. There's been games where they've missed the mark here and there. I mean, Alabama was terrible to start that game, obviously. But at the end of the day, this has been a really good defense, getting better throughout the years. And frankly, I think they put on the best defensive performance of anyone the entire year when they went to Texas a couple of weeks ago. So it is in there. There is a team in there that can play at a very elite level. We just haven't seen it nearly enough. And that's the big question as we head into this one. And the run game, both offensively and defensively, huge advantage to Tennessee. Maybe defensively, not quite as much of an advantage, but you do have the leading rusher in the SEC in Dylan Sampson. You have the 12th best rushing defense in the country. And while Georgia is top 20, I believe, in run defense, they're below 100 in terms of teams in the country when it comes to rush yards per game. So they're in a really, really tough spot where that pass game is just going to have to answer questions. It's just going to have to make more plays. There can't be drops. There can't be mistakes. And there especially can't be picks from Carson Beck. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this one. It's a huge game where Tennessee can outright bury UGA and possibly turn the tide in this rivalry. Georgia has a chance to possibly punch their ticket to the CFP 1 week after it being kind of all out there and all up in the air of sorts. But it's an all chips in the center of the table type of game. It is an all-in type of game. You're just going to have to see who comes out of this probably fist fight, who comes out on top, and that team probably has a really good shot at the CFP. The losing team is in a weird spot going forward, no doubt about that. Players to watch, you got to watch Squirrel White. I think this is the game changer for Tennessee in this game because you've seen the Georgia defense. They've been absolutely incredible pretty much all year. One place where they've struggled just a little bit is when the other team has an elite slot receiver. When they have a guy that can absolutely get downfield, that can make all the gadget plays, that can do all the little things that make it really tough for you to key in on one guy. So someone like Squirrel White, where you can get him on end arounds, you can get him on jet sweeps, you can get him to going downfield and hit a couple of those big plays that you're very much going to need in this game. I think it makes it so much easier for someone like Dylan Sampson to operate against a defense that is very good, against a defense that is good at stopping the run. You're going to need to be able to spread them out, and Squirrel White's exactly how you do that. And then obviously James Pierce Jr. You just saw this offensive line for Georgia really struggle for the past couple of weeks, and now they get the best pass rusher in the country to go up against. So it's going to be a load for them to deal with. There's no doubt about that, and he's one of those guys that can just totally take over this game, a la JTT in the 2020 Ohio State-Penn State game. It could be like that on Saturday if James Pierce Jr. can really get his feet under him and totally take over this game. Oh, excuse me about that. Lawson Lucky is someone else that I think is hugely important in this game because I think for Georgia to be successful in the pass game, it's got to be some moving the pocket. It's got to be some bootlegs to tight ends. It's got to be some relatively easy things at the end of the day for Carson Beck early in this game. And then on top of that, I think he's someone that really is a matchup nightmare for a lot of different linebackers out there, for a lot of different DBs out there. If Boo Carter's going to have to end up guarding him, it's going to be a load for that guy to deal with. So I do think that Lawson Lucky, while you have, so many issues at the wide receiver position, at the running back position, I think this is a guy that could really help this offense. And when they've had really big offensive games, he's been at the center of it a lot of the time. And then you got Nazir Stackhouse, the defensive tackle for Georgia. He is someone that I think is huge for this game because if you don't at least slow down Dylan Sampson, you are not going to win this game. If he gets rolling downhill, if he can get over 100, 150 yards, you are absolutely cooked, and it's not going to be very, very close. Tennessee is going to be able to essentially bury you in this game. Now, Nazir Stackhouse in that front seven has been really good at stopping the run, so they should be up for the challenge, but it starts with that guy. It starts with the leader of that front seven, and definitely someone that needs to have one of the best games, if not the best game of the year for them to win this one. But moving to Tennessee's keys to the game, because there's quite a few of them. I think the biggest one is the pass rush just needs to be in attack mode. They have 22 sacks on the season. James Pierce Jr. has 5.5 himself, and this O-line has gave up 5 sacks last week to Ole Miss. It's a team that you can get after. It's a team, an offensive line in particular, that you can really attack and possibly get to the quarterback a couple of times. So I do think they go into attack mode and just trust the guys on the back end, especially if Georgia's going to drop some balls or miss some receivers, or Carson Beck's not going to see the hook coverage defender. It's a way you can totally change this game. And Carson Beck under pressure, very different quarterback than when he's totally clean. And then you got to hit a couple of deep plays in the pass game, whether that's Nico or Gaston Moore on the field. You have to find deep balls in this game. You have to be able to get behind the defense just a couple of times, and Georgia has shown to be prone to that a couple of times in the Alabama game. They got a couple of times during Ole Miss. It's one of those things that if you can hit 1, 2, maybe even 3 of these, you can probably open up enough run lanes for Dylan Sampson to get going, and that's the third key. It's got to be the Dylan Sampson show, especially with the uncertainty at quarterback. You need to hit those big shots, don't get me wrong, but it's got to be him. He's got to be the guy that's leading the way. He's got to be the guy that's carrying the load like he has pretty much all season. So it's going to be really interesting to see just how much Georgia keys in on that and if they're able to stop him, because no one really has been able to yet. But moving on to how Georgia gets it done, no unforced errors. Georgia has 29 drops this year. They average 6.3 penalties per game, good for 78th in the country. They've lost 3 fumbles in the last 2 games. That cannot happen. They cannot hurt themselves on Saturday, because the reality is Tennessee's going to be right there to take all your worries, all of your mistakes, and take them back for touchdowns. That's what they do. They are very good at defense. They are very opportunistic. If you allow them openings, they will take them and they will say thank you. So you're going to have to be very careful and just not beat yourself. You are plenty good enough there to where if you are playing even football, if you're not giving the ball away, if you're not having drops, if you're not having big-time penalties, you can beat this team just straight up. If you start handing them things, then things get a little bit sketchy, and then Tennessee's big-time offense can make a couple of those big-time plays that we talked about. But the other part of this is pass protection. We talked about that Tennessee pass rush. You just got to play your best game of the year. If you're this O-line, it needs to be this entire week. It needs to be as laser-focused as you ever have been this year, and it needs to be coming out there with a vengeance. You cannot play this game if your offensive line cannot block. You will not be able to get any rhythm going. You will have to fight for every single play that you get, and I promise you, it will be an ugly game from the jump for Georgia. So this offensive line needs to play the best football they've played all year, and if they don't, James Pierce Jr. and friends is totally going to feast on you. And then make Nico or Gaston, depending on who's out there, make them beat you. That's the goal of Saturday. Do everything you can to stop Dylan Sampson. Do everything you can to stop number 6. And then you'll see what happens on the back end. You have very good coverage corners. You have wide receivers on the other side that, while very talented, might not be those one-on-one beaters that a lot of other teams have had, like Ole Miss or like Texas. So I think you're in a position here like Alabama. Ryan Williams, one of the best one-on-one beaters in the entire country. So you're in a position where stop the head of the monster, cut off the head of the dragon. See what happens after that. You have an ability to hang up on the back end, but can't really do that if Dylan Sampson is being able to tear off 4 yards a run or 5 yards a run, and then you have to drop more guys into the box. That's when Tennessee starts to beat you. So I think that's going to be a huge thing. Just make that guy beat you. And frankly, a lot of things go in Tennessee's direction in this game. A whole lot of things make me think that Tennessee is going to win this football game. I'm going to make Georgia prove it to me. I'm going to make Georgia prove me wrong and show me that they are not the normal Georgia team. I'm going to make them entirely prove it to me, because there's this thing in the back of my head that just says Kirby Smart is getting into these kids this week, that they're going to come out with their hair on fire, and that defense is going to play as good of football as they have played all year. I'll be totally honest, I don't really have a good reason for it. I can't sit here and give you a ton of stats. I can't sit here and give you a ton of reasoning for this happening. What I can say is Georgia's back is up against the wall, and no one operates better than with their back up against the wall than Kirby Smart. So I'm going to go with Georgia here. I know it might sound a little bit crazy, and when you look at the metrics, it definitely does look crazy. And Tennessee would not be surprised if they were able to go into Athens and win this game. But I'm going to make Georgia prove it to me. I'm going to make them prove that they are not the normal Georgia team, that they are not the same Kirby Smart team. And I don't think they will. I think they will win this game. I think they will really make a statement and likely will be in that 12-team field at the end of this thing. And Tennessee's hopes will be in a weird place after this game. We'll just leave it at that. But let's take our first break here. And when we come back, we got to get into this big noon kickoff controversy. There are a lot of angry fans up there in the Big Ten, and I'll tell you why some of their anger is a little bit misguided. But we'll talk about it right after this.